Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, respected listeners. You're joining us here once again on the Islamic Literary Society with another amazing interview with another amazing book. The Islamic Literary Society, respected listeners, was founded in 2019 with the aim of promoting, fostering, and developing a heightened appreciation of authors and literary works of classical and contemporary scholarship. And we do that in a number of different ways. We've got book reviews, you can see them on our website. We've got interviews like now, and these are probably the best or the most interactive, where you get to speak to the author of books, get to ask them direct questions of what they put inside the books, and inshallah have an entertaining time talking to them about their ideas and what drove them to put various information or whatever is inside of their book. So we get to have direct access to the authors. So respected viewers, we'll begin with our interview and we'll introduce you to the website and various other aspects of the Islamic Society as we go through with the program. So let us begin right from the top and introduce our guest speaker for the day. Bismillah. Okay, so we have with us Dr. Ramon Harvey, who is at the Aziz Foundation lecturer in Cambridge Muslim College, alhamdulillah, and he completed his PhD at SOAS, University of London, and has published a number of articles in Quranic studies and theology. And the book we're going to be looking at today primarily is the Qur'an and the Just Society, alhamdulillah. Furthermore, Brother Raymond has another book as well that is on is released, I'm not sure, or it's going to be launched soon, but the title of that is Transcendent God and Rational World. So we'll get inshallah the brother to explain. I'd like to begin by saying assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, and I'm happy for the work you're doing. So just to mention, the Qur'an and the Just Society came out end of 2017. It's officially 2018, and Transcendent God, Rational World, which is the new one, which is a theological book. It just came out this year, a couple of months ago, and the official launch is this week.
Okay, so fantastic. Yeah, mashallah. So I like the first book, inshallah, which we're going to focus on today, the topic of justice, especially with what we see going around us today in the world. Is a very, very important topic. Could I ask you to give us just a quick background about yourself for the viewers? They want to know who you are, what you've done, what you've achieved, and where you're going.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I'm from London originally. Actually, before I'm a convert to Islam. And I converted after my university degree. So I went to Nottingham and did an undergraduate degree, which was philosophy and American studies. And then after that, I took a change, obviously converting to Islam, which was for sorts of personal, spiritual experience and those kind of reasons. And so based on that, I really shifted first to kind of more traditional Islamic studies with like local teachers, started learning Arabic. I really studied with a range of different teachers, traditions, just absorbing information. And I also spent a little bit of time in Al-Azhar on a intensive course, which was organized, and I was able to benefit from that. But my main kind of formal Islamic traditional education was with the As-Salam Institute, which was in Oxford and then moved to London in recent years, and that's headed up by Shaykh Nadwi, and so that's was important. So I achieved the Alamiya qualification with them, but I also carried on with postgraduate work in the academy at SOAS for a master's and PhD, which was supervised by Professor Muhammad Abdul Halim, who's a well-known translator of the Qur'an and scholar of Quranic studies. And after the PhD, I mean, obviously at that point, you sort of almost topped out in terms of the academic world. And so what I found is really beneficial is just to, to continue studying, really researching and writing books, writing articles, and actually just engaging with other academics, other scholars, different platforms, conferences, and, private seminars as well. So the learning doesn't stop, it carries on, but more kind of, you're often learning from other kind of scholars and at a kind of peer level, and it's very beneficial. So alhamdulillah, and I've kind of shifted increasingly to theology. I'm still working in Quranic studies as well, but my interests have moved also to theology. So I kind of pitch it as Quranic studies, theology, and ethics are kind of my main areas.
Yeah, mashallah. So I can see that you've got a line or a history of writing articles and books and so on and so forth. What would you say? How does writing really contribute to your development? Like, how did this all begin? You realize that you've got the skill, and how did you manage to develop it?
So yeah, I mean, I think writing really is a craft. It takes a lot of time and effort, and when often I try to write every day. Sometimes that's not possible, of course, because of other things in life and family needs and so on, and other duties even within teaching and so on. But yeah, writing regularly really helps. I think I really see writing as thinking. Right. And this is something that came up in like some of my studies actually at university. This point was made, and I think that this is a good point, that when you write, you're forced to put things in order. And so your ideas can be all over the place, but when you really try to put them down, it forces an order. And this is for thousands of years, this has been the way that people think and the way they organize their thinking. And so by writing, it forces you to kind of really hone your thinking. Obviously, in academic writing, you then have to find sources and reference things and so on. And so this really trains one to think in a clear way. And obviously, once it's written down, you can revise it and improve it. And we've got so many tools these days. And some people swear by writing by hand and so on. But for myself, as someone who's kind of grown up obviously in this digital age we're in now, that I work almost pretty much exclusively on computers. Even the notes, I write notes on a note program, for example, into the Word file, and then I build up from the notes, and then I get to a draft and I revise. And obviously people don't always appreciate just how much effort and how much rewriting goes into writing a book. Even at the final stages of proofreading, you're still changing paragraphs, you're still responding to new points and new arguments. But yeah, I think that's important. And then obviously there's a bigger picture here, and that's I think that obviously for writing, what really inspires me about it is this idea of being able to give an original contribution to the ummah, to Muslim ummah, also to humanity as a whole. And of course, we know that one of the types of the sadaqah jariyah is beneficial knowledge, that lasts after your death. So, and as someone obviously deeply immersed in the classical literature in Arabic, you see how much these scholars that have come before have benefited people so many centuries later. And so, as you try to sort of add your kind of incremental piece to that legacy, obviously we hope that even these works written now in English, in our era, can also be a benefit for those that come after us.
Yeah, and what would you say, or advice would you give to the young Muslim audience in getting them to understand Islam, understand what's happening around them in the world today? What role does reading, writing, collecting information, how important is that for us to be really informed and educate people?
I mean, I think it's crucial. Our actions ultimately come based on our education and our knowledge. That what we think and how we think obviously flows into what we actually do. And so, there's obviously more information available, than ever before. Especially with Google and with the kind of the internet and so on. But at the same time, that can also lead to sort of a superficial approach to knowledge, to a sort of laziness and a reliance on kind of the tools that we have. So I think that it's important for younger people, to actually still read books, read full books. Don't just rely on like videos and so on, which is obviously, they can be very attractive. But if scholarship has never proceeded solely by obviously there is an important sort of oral tradition and important student-teacher tradition in Islam, but when you look at the kind of the scholarship, it always ends up in the written form, and people that write books always have to read, and so reading is really important. And I think also that this can be arranged. This can be like learning Arabic and accessing that, but also and I'd say that's so important if you want to take it to the level of real religious scholarship in Islam. You have to know Arabic for that religious scholarship within the disciplines such as fiqh and Qur'an, hadith. Kalam.
That takes me to
yeah.
my next question then.
Yeah. Oh, so sorry. I just want to say though that as well as Arabic, there's other languages as well, and that sometimes what you'll find is that Muslims will actually have a family connection to a certain language, might be Persian, Turkish, Urdu, and there's works in those languages, and of course in English as well these days, including translations and original works. So make the most of your languages, and I would say that's really important. And Arabic's there, but there's others as well that should be used as well. But sorry, carry on.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Sometimes we tend to just focus on the Arabic or the English, but there's a lot of information in Urdu and Persian and so on and so forth. Yeah, it's a very good point. I want to get back to your book now. Okay, talking about justice. I'm very interested to know, number one, if you could actually first give us a summary of what the book's about. What inspired you to write it, and what are we talking about when we talk about Quran and we talk about justice?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, one thing that really inspired me is that if anyone who reads the Quran and obviously understanding whether it's a truthful translation or understanding the Arabic, you realize the centrality of justice, and the vision of justice is very clear in the Quran and very inspiring, and it always has been for Muslims throughout the centuries, that there's this strong sense of social justice in the Quran, as well as other elements of justice, including the Day of Judgment and so on. So this is it's a central theme. But I realized, about the time I was coming to do my PhD and I was looking for a topic, that no one had really dealt with the theme of justice in the Quran in a serious academic way in English. You had, obviously it referenced in various places. People had written books even on justice in Islam, but justice in the Quran hadn't come up as a topic. And I thought this is just a big gap that needs to be addressed in a serious way. Put something out there that really explores it in a detailed way. And so that was a kind of part of the motivation was that there was a need for that. And then what the book's really about, I mean, it's obviously, it could take a while to explain all the details. I've given whole lectures just going through the concepts of the book, but just to put it in a real nutshell, as you said, is that it's kind of the book is arguing that it's possible to explore the Quran and explore the principles of justice, of social justice in the Quran, and see the sort of extract these principles and see how they were effective in the context of that society, that first community of those 23 or so years that the Prophet ﷺ was receiving the revelation of the Quran, and in his sort of prophetic mission, that what through that period, what principles of justice came down through the Quran, how did they impact that community, and where did it take the community in terms of social justice? That was my focus, and I tried to sort of show how to do that, and also how to kind of frame that in the kind of wider moral vision of the Quran, because the Quran is not just focused on justice. It looks at kind of morality more widely. It looks at history on a kind of cosmic scale from the very beginning to the very end of time. And so to place that kind of those 23 years of establishing justice within that wider frame, that's what I'm kind of doing in the book. And I feel that it was obviously it was a good book and an interesting book, and still can readers can find a lot in there in different ways. And I'm kind of I'm happy and grateful to the opportunity to have studied and written it.
Alhamdulillah. And I noticed as well how you divide up justice into a number of different aspects. You make it really, alhamdulillah, easy to understand, bite-sized subjects, I'd say. You have it broken into Quranic ethics, political justice, distributive justice, and corrective justice. So I know I don't turn this into a lecture, but just very briefly, when you say Quranic ethics, what are we dealing with? With morality? What are we looking at there?
Yeah. So what I try to do in the first part is before I get down to the kind of as I said, the structure of justice, or that these detailed themes, I try to sort of think, well, how am I going to approach this question of Quranic ethics?
Yeah.
And so I end up inevitably I talk about this a few different things. I talk about this what I call the moral narrative, which is this larger picture of kind of human history, and there I introduce some very key concepts like adl and qist, these two words that are used for justice in the Quran, and I actually try to distinguish between them to some extent, some of their sort of subtler points of meaning, And I look at other words as well that are important, like fitra, and the sort of human, sort of natural state or disposition of the human being. Words like sharia, so I don't just look at justice on its own, but I look at it in its wider frame of ethics. And then I also, in that section of the book, look at kind of some questions of theology, and sort of, what even is like a moral value, and on a kind of, how do we know, how can we know morality? How can human beings come to knowledge about what's right and wrong? Is it just only through scripture, or do we have an ability to kind of understand it through our rational basis as well? Questions like that, questions of kind of ethical theory. And I also go into what we call hermeneutics, like what are my principles for reading the Quran in the rest of the book? So and also finally in that section I look at the kind of the context of Arabian society, and particularly Mecca and Medina in those crucial years. What was a society like? What's the background in which the Quran is being revealed, and how is it affected by the by the life of the Prophet? And here we get the seerah coming in, which is also an interest of mine. And the reason I do all that is to kind of lay all those foundations in place. So when I come in the main bit of the book to these, as you said, bite-sized discussions of kind of different themes, and here we're going to look at marriage, and here we're going to look at inheritance. I don't have to keep repeating myself. It's already been laid out in the first part of the book, and I can just refer back basically to what I've laid out. So I try to do it in a way that's useful for the reader. And then those who are more interested in the practical side of it, as in, the verses and how I'm reading the verses, they don't have to necessarily get into the theory. But those who are interested in the kind of the deeper understanding of these things, they should read that first part of the book. Yeah.
I mean, especially the second part, then after the Quranic ethics, where you talk about political justice and you start talking about politics, peace, and war. That's when things start to get really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean that's an interesting section to me because, there is certainly a kind of political dimension to obviously to the Quran and to what's being said in the Quran. But it's kind of notable that the Quran, in Allah speaking in the Quran, doesn't kind of always specify exactly like how politics should happen. It's quite implicit in the community that's being addressed. Obviously, the Prophet Muhammad SAW is the leader of that community, and he's addressed in his personal situation. He's given commands for his personal situation. But compared to some other elements of kind of we could say the Sharia, politics is a little bit more open, and I think a little bit more left. General principles of the kind of values that should be there are given, but the kind of precise, what we call ahkam, precise rulings for politics are not so present, which I think is one of the flexibilities of Islam, that there are different possible ways to take, and understand Islam. And obviously jurists, later on have gone in and found various kind of ahkam from the Quran, and things can be kind of derived there. But in general, I try to argue for a kind of a flexibility and for some general principles about kind of the responsibility of human beings as stewards of God, as the idea of a khalifa, as a kind of ethical steward. And then there is this other sense of a kind of someone who is in, the person who is in charge. And there is, an idea of the kind of the leader. But some of the development, obviously, of the kind of caliphates, some of those political developments, obviously come from developments from the community, from the Muslims, as they kind of try to realize the Quranic vision in history, and you get the rise of, like, for example, the Umayyads, the Abbasids, and different dynasties. And I don't go into the kind of political history after as I said, my cutoff point in the book, in terms of kind of my sort of analysis, is generally the very end of the Prophet Muhammad's life. But in terms of the sources I'm using, of course, I'm relying on, later books of tafsir, later books of language, and so on and so forth. Those are important sources. But the focus of the material itself is always on the Quran itself and its time. And so I don't get into some of the later developments in the tradition.
Yeah, of course. Having a look then at, after your deep study of justice in the Quran, how would you compare that then with justice as it's understood and perceived in the Western world? What would you say are the main 2 or 3 dividing factors between the way justice is perceived?
I mean, that's a difficult question, of course, and I don't want to kind of speak in huge generalities and then make mistakes in that regard. But I would say that when we talk about the West, obviously we need to sort of nuance that term, because today obviously the West does include Islam and Muslims as well. But when we say the West, often we're thinking about obviously the sort of dominant majority non-Muslim kind of countries and kind of governance. And I would say that one of the things is that if you look to kind of Islam and to obviously taking the Qur'an as the most important primary source of Islam, then there is a kind of sense of justice that is closely connected to the revealed scripture, to what Muslims we understand to be God's word to us. In the West, of course, there is the sort of West is associated with the Bible and the Christian religion, but justice in the West has for the most part lost that connection to the Bible. So no one in the kind of West is going to try to bring necessarily, politicians and thinkers will not tend to try to bring back ideas of justice back to the ideas in the Bible necessarily. They will probably be trying to ground them more in like the ideals of the Enlightenment, concepts of freedom and liberty and so on. So there's a kind of post-Christian development in the West. And so I would say that's a big difference, that when Muslims are grounding themselves in the Quran, that's not quite comparable to how things have developed in the West. And I mean, one of the greatest works on this in books, it's a huge book, and so it's very hard to get through. But A Secular Age by Taylor this is a major work detailing how kind of the West has shifted to this kind of more secular outlook. So I think that's one difference. And then I also I would say that there are actually some quite strong commonalities between the West and Islam that you might not expect. And one of those is that I at least argue that in the Quran there is a sense that the human being, from whatever tradition, can understand justice and not necessarily always needing a revelation to understand points of justice. And so I sort of argue for a natural law position, and this is something that we do see in the Western tradition as well. So I think there can be some commonalities, and shared points.
Is that where you refer to the Adamic Fitra?
Yeah. So I mean, I think that you can look at the concept of obviously the concept of fitra in the Quran is not fully explained. It's mentioned that there is a kind of human sort of nature, a kind of natural characteristic of the human being. And then obviously when we come to that, we can make some inferences and we can make some kind of connections. And I at least prefer this idea that that the human being can come to understand justice and injustice without revelation, and actually the Quranic audience is being addressed by, when the Quran is revealed, it's immediately calling people to a standard of justice they should know, and that they themselves know they're doing wrong. And so it puts itself forward as a reminder, not just as something entirely fresh and new. So this is what I argue. There's another opinion that that puts everything into revelation. I think that revelation is there as a kind of as a second source, as a perfection. It gives details that the human mind might not be able to know. It also encourages in a way that the human being needs, and it also so it's essential for the full development of the human being. This is so it's not a lessening of revelation, but it's also, I think it's important not to lessen the human being, the natural abilities of human beings. And also what that does, I think, is it opens up a space, even if someone doesn't share the religious tradition, we can agree on common values of justice.
Sure.
And I think that's really important. So one of the arguments I try to make in the book is, because some people have argued that that Muslims or Islam is kind of, in a sense, sort of fundamentalist, that everything has to come back to a Quranic verse, and therefore if you don't accept that if someone doesn't accept that revelation, they'll have nothing in common, there'll be no justice there. And I'm trying to argue for a more subtle view that no, there is much that can be agreed, right, and that can be known before revelation, but revelation does add these additional elements, right. But when it adds these additional elements, those are things that are binding on the Muslims. The Sharia, when it goes beyond, it's binding on Muslims themselves. For example, things like, once you accept Islam, then suddenly you're going to start praying Salah, doing Hajj. But until you accept the Shahada, then there's still, even in the absence of accepting the Shahada, there's still elements of justice fairness that will be binding on everyone, regardless of their commitments. So I make these kind of arguments. Obviously, it's not maybe the place to go into detail, but if people are interested, read the book. Also, there's some other articles and things that I've written that kind of elaborate.
It's definitely very interesting. So the whole purpose of the interview is that you get to open your book and discuss it, and inshallah, people after this, we will show them the book as well. They can go and get a copy and get more details on the subjects that we're discussing. If we continue looking through the book as well, on the topic of justice, one of the other unique things about Islam is that it looks at justice from a societal perspective, right? How to achieve justice as a community. Whereas today, we're always, when we're talking about being liberal or looking at people as individuals, we try to get justice for individuals. Now, is there a contradiction there between individualism and looking at things as society?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, you know, in the West today, you know, in modernity, you know, there is this kind of individualistic living. It's not even just something that we can fully choose or not choose. We're kind of sort of society is arranged in that way, and sometimes there's communities that you know, as a community, they do kind of resist that. You know, for myself, obviously, you know, I grew up in a kind of quite individualistic kind of Western society, and then I came across, actually, particularly in a smaller community in Nottingham, I found more of that kind of communal living was available. When I moved back to London again, much less. Again, I think it's also depends on where you are, how big the city is, and a lot of different factors. I think it's hard. I think there is a bit of we could say, I wouldn't say necessarily a contradiction, is maybe not quite the right word, but there is certainly a kind of tension there, where if you are to try to live as the vision of justice and of social life and ethics presented in the Qur'an, it's given to a much more tightly knit community than is often found today, and it is you know, that's the expectation. And I think not just that you know, in Arabia in the 7th century they happen to have that's true, but also there is an expectation for that, which can sometimes be hard to live alongside the pressures, economic, social, and so, you know, everything around us today in the West. So I think obviously we have to try to find the best ways we can to realize the Quranic vision in our lives, in our communities, to try to bridge those gaps. And you know, I think that's a challenge that we do have if we are committed to this kind of more communal ethical vision. So I think that, yeah, it's hard, and I can't say that in my own case I always succeed in that, you know, as you know, but I do think it's something we should look to you know, resolve. And it's one of the big questions that we have as a Muslim community. How do we you know, really exist as a community in the right way in these conditions that we have right now?
And so, assuming as well, just if we just assume that theoretically that you know, let's say everyone's Muslim, or in a place where there isn't a contradiction or a difference of faith, and we wanted to attain justice the way, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us in the Quran. Now, could we attain that justice individually, like all of us, we do whatever we've got to do or whatever we think is just, or do we have to, are we forced to come together as a community in order to attain that justice?
No, I think ultimately to attain the justice, we have to do it as a community. I agree with that. You know, that you know, justice sort of, you know, in many ways, justice doesn't make a lot of sense individually. You know, social justice. There's sort of needs, you know, and in the book I talk about, you know, the political justice, this whole idea of political justice, you know, it's talking about like, how is the community led? How does it interact? How is it governed from the top? You know, what would that look like? And I do think there's flexibility, but there has to be some kind of governance, and there has to be, and practically speaking, even if you're you know, even if there was like a Muslim, I don't know, a Muslim country where 99% or 100% people in the country are Muslim, they still have to engage with other people in the world. And of course, in the Quran, Allah tells us that there will always be these differences, that people will, you know, there's this understanding in the Quran that there's always going to be people of different beliefs, different religions that have to engage each other. And so there has to be kind of a way to find that communal justice. And then obviously internally, there's, you know, roles and responsibilities, and within families, within, you know, communities, you know, economics, the whole purpose of zakah, to kind of circulate back wealth to people who are more in need. So yeah, it has to be done communally, and we have to find those ways. So it's certainly not something, I'm not suggesting for a second that because we're kind of in a individualistic society, I mean, it's never entirely individualistic, but you could say more individualistic
as a theory,
with those tendencies,
yeah.
that we can kind of do without a communal element. But I think the challenge is, we know those ideals, but there's always that gap to kind of bridge. And to be fair, in the book, I'm trying to take one step, and to look at what the Qur'an is saying. But there is a second step, which is to look at, like, how do you translate that into very practical aspects of the contemporary world and the contemporary society. And I haven't tried to do that, to be fair. And I think that is, and I actually would sort of encourage people, to take on the book and see ways they can, in their own context, or even, in terms of even theory as well, in terms of writing, what would it look like to realize some of this today? I think there is more to be done. I'm not saying, I certainly don't think my book can be taken as kind of a blueprint in itself to sort of reform the contemporary Muslim society or community. What needs to be done is kind of further work. How do we realize this now? How do we make this something that's practical for us?
Alhamdulillah. So it's like you establish the kind of like the goals and the objectives, and you make it very realistic, and then from there we've got to kind of like work out the strategy. How do we
It's I mean, it's very idealistic, I would say. And then I think everyone has to use their own strengths and abilities. Like, I'm not someone who is necessarily going to know the best ways for things to work in every community or on the street level. But I was able to study some interesting things about the Quran and about Islamic history and hermeneutics, and put that together in a way. Hopefully people can then take that forward in a very practical way and find solutions. That's what we want. And if they could, and if my book was helpful, then I'll be very happy.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. I want to take one example, talking about being practical, just one example, and it's something that you mentioned in the book. So something a bit controversial. So today, marriage is not seen as something that important, right? It's just a piece of paper, and you do it in front of a religious man. It's not very important. But whereas Islam is very heavy, and marriage is a central theme in building a society. How would you say, or what would you say, the role marriage plays in building a just society?
So I mean, marriage is, as you say, very important in the Quran. It's really the cornerstone of society, because what you have is marriage is the basis for families to come together. And so, and when families come together through marriage, that's what unites. It unites the interests of families. It also, obviously, we know it unites actually it makes a new family. The children are now connected by genetically as well, as we know. But this is understood in the Quran and in the vision that Islam has, that family is really important. That uniting families, and this is the basis for society. Basically, this is the building block. So it's very important. It's also, it's not something that's negotiable in Islam. As if you want to have a sexual relationship which is legitimate in front of God, according to Islam, that is through marriage. Right. And so it's something that is just absolutely essential. So it can never be outdated. It can never be, it has to always be there. This is the nikah. Now, obviously, there's a relationship that nikah, that the Islamic marriage, we could say, can have to the kind of legal marriage of a country and so on, and often it's in the interests of Muslims, to actually obviously have the legal marriage as well, and that's sometimes emphasized a lot, and it depends on obviously the particular circumstances. What I would like to highlight on this point, though, that my book, what it actually shows is that although I analyzed the Quranic discourses on marriage, that although the actual focus on marriage is very clear and defined, and that it must be there, the details of exactly what the duties of the husband and wife, and how exactly things are managed at the level of detail, is very much open to this idea of what's ma'ruf, and this also happens in elements connected with settlements after divorce and so on. That the ma'ruf is like what is customarily accepted, and so what the Quran, you'll see in the sections on marriage, again and again, Allah is saying that, do this according to what is known amongst you as customarily acceptable. And I think what I highlight in the book is that this is really pointing to the adaptability of the core of Islamic marriage as a religious institution, not a sacrament like in the way of Christianity, but definitely a religious institution in front of, in fiqh and in Sharia. That this is adaptable to different cultural circumstances, and so within the realms of what's acceptable in Sharia in Islamic law, there are a wide range of ways to do marriage, ways to do weddings, expectations, as long as the people involved find that acceptable and it's acceptable according to their kind of the standards of the culture. It's open, and we don't have to leave our own culture as long as it's within the bounds acceptable to Sharia. And I think this is does come up, for example, in the West, and in today, often it's very common for example, husband and wife both to work, both to kind of take part in cooking or cleaning and raising children. If that's the case in the culture and what's familiar to the people, and it's acceptable to the husband, to the wife, to the families, then there's nothing in Islam that prevents that sharing of responsibilities. And also if someone had a more traditional approach and everyone was happy with following the more traditional norms, again, Islam doesn't prevent that either. So there's a wide range. I mean, for Islam to be this great tradition, and obviously in my conviction, true religion, to sustain through these last millennia and a half, it's had to be able to be adaptable to all different types of culture. And so the call of Islam isn't to become Arabian or Arabic per se, although obviously Arabic remains an important religious language, in the way to access the Qur'an and the tradition. But it can be adapted to kind of any culture, any society, as long as certain key and core elements are maintained. And so,
okay,
for example,
that sounds fantastic. So at the end of the day, like you mentioned in the beginning as well, it's more about establishing some of the framework, the rules and principles. And then on top of that, we can enjoy. You can wear a white wedding dress, you can wear a yellow one, you can wear a green one. It's up to you.
Yeah. I think it's an open tradition, and there's always, of course, I mean, we haven't gone so much into it because we've been focusing on the Quran, but there is a huge range of different opinions in jurisprudence, in the different interpretations. So Islam is a very, very broad tradition with lots of possibilities, really. And the more that obviously people study their deen, study Islam, the more they will realize just how wide it is, how great it is, and there's room for so many different ways of life that still can be within the umbrella of Islam. So alhamdulillah, I think that's a mercy and a blessing, and that's why that's from the mercies of God that to make the religion easy and wide. And this is mentioned by the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, in his traditions about the deen being something of ease, and Allah says in the Quran as well, that He desires ease and not hardship for the people. So these principles are very clear, and of course in the details there's always scholars, and people should obviously consult people of knowledge to get guidance in interpreting some of the detailed questions they may have.
Okay, so looking at today's society and having looked at justice in Quran, do you think it's possible that we can establish a Quranic society? We can establish those principles of justice take it from the Quran and see it in front of our eyes?
I would like to be optimistic. I mean, obviously, as you get older, and I'm not very, very old yet, but getting older, you do become a little bit more realistic other than optimistic. When you're young, you're very idealistic, I think, and that's a good thing. So I think it's possible. We can't say it's not. There's been great things that have happened. Obviously, it's a big challenge, and at the moment we're falling short of that challenge in lots of ways. And so I think that if Muslims wanted to realize it, how could I be someone to say that it can't be achieved? Of course it's possible, but there needs to be a big change in how we approach things, in how we engage. For example, it's really sad to see sometimes that it's Muslim Muslim-run charities are like falling into corruption sometimes, and you know, these kind of things. We see these bad examples, and it's embarrassing, and so we need to do better. And at the same time, you know, as you know, we have to also acknowledge the great things that, you know, the elders have done, the Muslim you know, this community have done set of amazing institutions, you know, amazing efforts have been made, and sometimes the young are not doing enough to live up to those paths as well. So I think that you know, every generation sort of inherits from the one before, and so, you know, as the kind of younger generation rises up and takes over these positions of responsibility, we should be grateful for what we've taken to us, and then also seek to learn from mistakes that have been made as well and do better in some regards. But I think if we want justice, we need to strive for it, and we need to be personally upright and not cut corners, and you know, you know. So I think it does start at the level. The community also does have this kind of element where we're not individualistic, but there is an individual responsibility, you know, because at the end of the day, everyone at the end will stand alone in front of Allah. So there is an individual standard of justice we need to have, and we need to think: are we happy? Can we live with our own conscience about what we do in our lives, and are we upholding justice? And if we can do that as well as reach out collectively, inshallah, we can realize this.
On that note as well, you mentioned the youngsters and justice. On that note, what advice would you give our youth, our youngsters, born and bred here, raised in this environment? What practical steps, or what can they do to kind of be a more just people?
I mean, it's difficult to say, but I would say, like, obviously, you know, as you know, try to stand up in your own you know, immediate context. So be just in your own families, you know, be just in your relationship with your parents, with your brothers and sisters, with your family members, with your children. You know, try to be you know, have standards of justice, you know, especially with those people you can influence. For example, often your children and so on, you have more of an influence in how they learn, how they're raised. Also, educate you know, everyone should educate themselves about what you know, what is Islamic, you know, what does Islam say, what does Allah want from us. So that's important, you know, and you know, and if you see, you know, if people see injustice, obviously we know from the Prophet ﷺ, if you can change it with your hand, if you can't, then change it with your tongue, and if you can't do that, then at least hate it in your heart. At least the minimum is to at least to hate the injustice we see, and we see a lot in society, and especially, you know, you know, it's very apparent in the UK. You know, some of the corruption in the political sphere, politicians kind of enriching their friends, you know, even in the midst of a pandemic, you know, in terms of these kind of contracts. You know, and we should do more to sort of speak out about these things, to be to sort of not accept these things. And I think there's a danger to kind of be apathetic and to let injustice just kind of continue because it's too hard to speak out. And I'm not you know, I'm not pointing fingers at anyone. We all need to try to do better at sort of making that difference in our lives. So hopefully that's useful. And there's more obviously that can be said, you know, and there will be, I think, people in the community that will be able to speak to particular issues and to questions and be able to kind of give really good practical guidance of kind of the sort of campaigns, the sort of areas that need addressing, and hopefully they can do that.
So one final question, mashallah, we've been speaking for some time now, and I really appreciate your time and your contribution to the interview. My final question would be, you know, subhanAllah, I'm very much impressed, in all honesty, with yourself and your, you know, you said you're a revert and you're coming to Islam, and mashallah, you've achieved so much and you're working so hard. What advice can we give to our own community, the Muslim community, on how they can reconnect with their heritage, with their history, with what we've achieved and what we could potentially achieve again? You know, what can we tell them? What can, you know, we want to put some basic, some electricity into these, shake them up a little bit. What would you say?
I mean, I think that there's so many opportunities now for young Muslims to get involved in the discourse. In, you know, there's so much social media. There's so many ways to get a message out there. And so I think people need to be, you know, to be active. As I said, you know, learn, read, get involved in understanding, studying, taking opportunities. And I know many are. I mean, I've had so many students, you know, that from Ibrahim College, my time working there. other places. People contact me, and I try my best to answer emails and give advice, and and get people to kind of in academia. We need people doing scholarship. We need people doing traditional scholarship, doing academic scholarship, doing this kind of intermediate ground, which is kind of somewhat where I am. But you can write on blogs. You can write, use the social media sites. Get involved in teaching circles. I mean, hopefully, do a lot of your studies and training, and actually join us in kind of academic conferences, in publishing in the journals and writing books. I think it's a really exciting time for young people to add to what add new ideas, add fresh energy, combine fields that people haven't thought of. If you're an expert in science, bring those ideas into our discourse. If you're an expert in law or in social issues, or you've got a background working in in the public sector or in charity work, bring those ideas into the conversation. Talk to academics, get involved. There's so many people doing great work out there. I know a lot of them. People, different areas, and just taking fields of study and combining it with Islam in wonderful ways. And so there's a lot of chances to be involved. Set up institutions.
Okay.
Obviously there we have some good institutions, but set up new ones. Set up charities, other types of organizations. Find the needs and the problems that we have, and then try to be creative in finding solutions. And inshallah, with the right intentions, we'll have tawfiq to be successful, inshallah.
MashaAllah, some very, very practical tips for all of us, not just the youngsters, but to be engaged in. Dr. Raymond, I really, really appreciate your time with us. Don't go away. I'm just going to introduce everyone to the website. Here's our website as well. Let's go to the home page. Okay, there we go. The Islamic Literary Society. Alhamdulillah, we've got an amazing book launch coming up on the 19th of September. So do join us there. Lots of things to come. You got an about us section, so you get to see what we do. Subjects, of course, we deal with all subjects, Islamic subjects, history, politics, poetry, fiction, all the things there. Articles, we have regular articles. As you can see here, the books as well. Each book has a review underneath it, so you can get into the books and read the reviews. Here's one about the return of God. There's a nice little review there. So before you buy it, you can see the content. Videos, effectively like the interview today, you will see this appearing under this section. So do come into the website and join it. And here you've got a section on finding a reading club. So one of the things that we promote is small reading clubs in your local area. We help and encourage people to come together and form a group, get a book and read it together. We'll help you if you need to organize or structure those things. Finally, there is a section here on membership. So if you join the society, you'll get some extra privileges. I won't tell you about those, but if you click the button, you'll be able to see those. So inshallah, join us, inshallah, and allow for this society to grow. And it also gives an opportunity. Okay, it also gives an opportunity for authors, who appear on our program to get their voices out and their books to be heard, because effectively we have gems in our society and they're not being appreciated, they're not being seen. So that's one of our objectives, to get people like that onto the front line, inshallah. Doctor, stay with us again. I will just wrap things up here. On that note, inshallah, dear viewers, thank you very much for tuning in and joining us on another interview. We'll see you soon. With another amazing book, another great, amazing author. We have the book launch on the 19th of September, so do join us on that. So until next time, barakallahu fikum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you immensely for spending this time with us. We'll see you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.